She didn't breathe in the cold. That's what the first nurse wrote. Not that the girl was dead, but that her body gave off no steam, no condensation, not even a hint of warmth as she sat alone on the stone steps behind room 6. It was Baltimore 1849. A brutal winter had iced over the city, but this girl, no more than 12, sat motionless in a thin cotton dress that had no seams, no buttons, and no name sewn into the collar. No one saw her arrive. No one knew her. Yet she stared straight ahead, eyes open, unblinking, as if she had been waiting. What followed became one of the most disturbing historical mysteries ever recorded in American psychiatric care. The hospital's official records call her unnamed female, room 6. But to those who worked there, she became known simply as the girl who wrote your name before you spoke it. This is a case buried beneath 170 years of silence, fear, and institutional shame. A case so strange, it still haunts the edges of every true crime archive, every creepy, unsolved case, and every dark American history video that dares to tell the truth. They found her just past midnight, barefoot, silent, and perfectly still, curled at the base of a crumbling service door behind Ward C. The snow hadn't melted where she sat. Her skin was pale, not frostbitten, but untouched by temperature altogether. No pulse spike, no pupil reaction to light. The attending nurse, Miriam Cotter, noted unresponsive to all sensory stimulus, no blink, no flinch, no chill. The slate grey dress she wore wasn't stitched. It had been sealed shut with hospital-grade surgical thread, the kind last used in 1834 for autopsy reports. There was no tag, no initials, no explanation. But when Dr. Nathaniel Hale arrived and whispered his name to a nearby intern, the girl's head turned slowly, and she began to write his full name, middle initial, and all on the wall behind her. She didn't look up. She just kept writing again and again. That was the first moment they realized she wasn't just there to be found, she had come looking. But for who and why would only begin to unravel when they discovered what lay just beyond the sealed threshold of room 6. She didn't knock. She didn't cry. She just appeared. At 2:13 a.m. on January 6, 1849, their overnight ward assistant at Ashbury Hall Hospital glanced out the frost-covered side window and saw what looked like a statue slumped near the rear steps. But statues don't shift their head when stared at, and statues don't hold writing slates in their lap. The girl, if she could be called that, was no more than 12 barefoot in the snow, seated upright in a thin grey dress that had no visible seams, buttons or fastenings. Her hair was damp, not from snow, but from something they would later call internal humidity, as if her body breathed differently from the rest of us. Her fingers were raw, but not bleeding. Her lips were slightly parted, though no sound ever came out. There were no reports of a missing child that matched her. No local churches, schools or households had seen her before. And yet the moment Nurse Miriam Cotter opened the door, the girl turned her eyes with the precision of someone who already knew what would happen next. What they couldn't explain, what still chills the few who remember, is that her slate already had 3 words etched into it. I remember you. But the nurse had never seen her before in her life. Or so she thought. She knew names no one had spoken aloud. That was the second thing they realized, as Dr. Nathaniel Hale stepped into the hallway and glanced at the child through the viewing window. She had already begun writing his full name, not once but 3 times, followed by the name of his mother deceased 12 years prior, and a word he hadn't heard since childhood Thornfield, the name of a forgotten creek behind his family farm. No one at the hospital knew that word. No one could have. Yet it was carved into her slate with steady, unflinching pressure. When the orderlies tried to lift her, she did not resist, but she wouldn't blink either. Her eyes moved only when someone whispered. Not to her, but near her. And every time they did, she'd write that person's name next. Always in the same order. First name, middle, initial, last name, and something personal only they would understand. No one ever saw her write anything untrue. Not once. And so without agreement or formal instruction, she was taken into the West Wing and placed in isolation into a storage room that had no bed, no linens, no record of prior use, and no designation in the blueprints. But that room would soon earn its own name, Room 6. She didn't ask questions, she answered ones no one had asked. By the third day, the hospital's head clerk attempted to test the girl's awareness by placing a blank ledger and chalkboard in her hands. No one prompted her. No one even spoke. But within seconds, she began to write names, not just staff, but former patients long since buried. Her handwriting was perfect cursive, eerily consistent with 19th century educational standards for girls from private parochial institutions. The problem was she wasn't enrolled anywhere. More disturbingly, when a visiting chaplain murmured Psalm 77 under his breath, his childhood favourite, the girl wrote the next 10 verses verbatim. The chaplain later swore he hadn't recited the verse aloud in over 20 years. When pressed further, she began scribbling Latin phrases used only in final rites and death dates linked to patients who had died in the hospital, often under mysterious or undocumented circumstances. Some of the names weren't even recorded in the official registry, but were later found in handwritten incident logs hidden in the locked basement. Staff began avoiding her room, not out of fear, but because each time they passed, she'd whisper a date, and weeks later, that person's relative would die on that very day. That's when the whispers among nurses began. She doesn't speak because she already knows everything. And they hadn't even opened the sealed drawer beneath her cot yet. It wasn't just what she knew. It was what she changed. Within 2 weeks, Room 6 had become the most avoided space in Ashbury Hall. Clerks refused to file records. Nurses rotated shifts to avoid her hour. But despite the silence, her influence grew. Objects moved when no one was near. Papers vanished. Medical files rewrote themselves. The hospital chalkboard, once used for shift rosters, now bore messages in reverse script, always in her handwriting, always before the staff arrived. And then came the incident with Dr. Byron Whitlow, a rationalist, a skeptic. He entered room 6 to prove she was a parlour trick. He didn't make it past the doorway. What he saw on the walls made him resign by sundown and leave Baltimore forever. That day marked the first mention of something even the administration couldn't ignore, the black-stain threshold. Because every day after that, a soot-like imprint would appear beneath her door, growing darker, wider, and hotter to the touch. And no matter how many times they scrubbed it, the mark always returned before dawn. That's when they decided to open the drawer. The drawer wasn't supposed to exist. Room 6 was originally a linen closet, sealed for decades, listed on no staff floor plans. But beneath the child's iron cot, behind a warped wooden panel, orderlies discovered a small compartment nailed shut from the inside. When pried open, they found no dust, no decay, no sign it had ever been unused. Inside lay one item, a folded cloth square, roughly the size of a baby blanket, embroidered with the words "Return her to the water." The thread was faded but unmistakably hand-stitched in a pattern that predated Civil War era domestic textile codes. But it wasn't what was in the drawer that unsettled them. It was what followed. The moment the cloth was removed, the hospital's east wing thermometers all surged to 106 degrees, triggering a full fire evacuation. But no heat source could be found. The girl didn't move. She just watched. Later that night, the hospital's bell tower rang 3 times at 3:12 a.m. A mechanical impossibility, since the bell's lever had been removed after a lightning strike in 1836. Security patrol logs that night recorded no intrusions, yet all 12 ground floor patient doors were found slightly ajar, with damp footprints leading away from room 6. Not toward the exit, but back toward the surgical archives. No one was supposed to be down there. The surgical archives of Ashbury Hall, sealed since the fire of 1837, were locked behind 2 rusted gates and a reinforced sub-level door. Yet on January 17th, just 4 nights after the drawer was opened, Dr. Nathaniel Hale found it wide open. Not broken, not forced, just quietly ajar like it had never been locked at all. Inside, the air was unnaturally cold, not winter cold, but damp stone cellar, cold like a forgotten mausoleum. The shelves had not been touched in years, yet someone had cleared a path straight to box 27B, a container of handwritten autopsy notices from patients marked anomalous. These were cases that had been quietly erased from public records. Victims of unknown syndromes, spontaneous paralysis, unnatural bleeding patterns, and in one case a woman whose blood tested identical to seawater. At the bottom of the box, Hale found a nameplate infant female, unbaptized, January 6, 1837. That was exactly 12 years to the day before the girl's arrival. And beneath the record was a single torn page written in a frantic scrawl. She cannot be buried. She listens through stone. She will return if called. But who called her and why now? That night the hospital clock stopped. At the same time, 3:12 a.m. Every single one. From the front desk, grandfather clock to the nurse's pocket watches, even the ticking second hand in Dr. Hale's personal office froze in perfect unison. When time resumed 6 minutes later, no one had any memory of what had happened during the pause, except the girl in room 6. She was no longer seated on her cot. She was standing in the center of the room, slate in hand, eyes wide open, pupils fully dilated. On the slate, one sentence was scrawled over and over again. "You are not where you think you are." Her feet were wet, not just damp dripping. And when they lifted the edge of her gown, they found sea kelp wrapped around her ankles. Fresh, living kelp, impossible to find in Baltimore in the dead of January. Lab tests confirmed the moisture on the slate was saline, matching the chemical composition of Atlantic seawater nearly perfectly. But she hadn't left the room. No one had entered. Surveillance had shown no movement. And yet her fingerprints were later found on the door to the bell tower, 4 floors up. The same tower that had been sealed shut since 1836. What's more unsettling? She wasn't the only one with salt water on her skin that night. That's when they stopped asking who she was and started fearing what she might become. Over the next 5 days, the air in room 6 grew heavier as if gravity had thickened. Light bulbs burst without warning. Insects gathered at the windows in the dead of winter. And every night at 3:12 a.m., the bell tower echoed once without a clapper, without sound waves. It was no longer about coincidence or confusion. Something was building. Something old. Something waiting. And it was using her. But the true unravelling the moment belief turned into dread came when they found the photo. The photograph wasn't in the archive. It was in Dr. Hale's personal journal, buried between pages he hadn't opened in years. A faded sepia image of a group of hospital staff taken in 1836, months before the East Wing fire. But in the bottom left corner, just beyond the group's edge, a figure was visible, a small girl in a grey dress, seated on the steps. Same posture, same blank expression, same eyes. At first, Hale believed it to be a trick of the shadows. But when he enhanced the photo using modern filters, the face became unmistakable. It was her, identical in every way down to the strand of hair tucked behind her left ear. But the photo was taken 13 years before she appeared. The staff grew quiet. Conversations stopped when her name was mentioned. Isolation turned into fear, and room 6 became a ghost zone. Nurses refused to enter alone, and the girl, once passive, began staring at the surveillance camera. Not at the lens, but through it, as if she knew someone on the other side was watching, as if she'd been waiting for the moment this photo would be found, and she was finally ready to move. The night shift nurse was the first to break protocol, and the last to speak her name aloud. Her badge logged entry into room 6 at 3:08 a.m., just 4 minutes before the tower bell was due to chime. She entered alone against regulation, determined to prove this was all hysteria. What followed remains one of the most disturbing pieces of internal hospital surveillance footage ever recorded, but it was wiped from the servers just 6 hours later. What little remains is a transcript the nurse entered. The girl looked up, said nothing. Then she smiled. Not just any smile, a deliberate knowing grin, as if she recognized her. Seconds later, the lights exploded, monitors flatlined, and in total darkness the audio picked up 5 whispered words, repeated 3 times. You opened it. You called. The nurse was found in the hallway, eyes open, but unresponsive hands clutching her own throat, as if silenced mid-scream. She never spoke again, not even under sedation. She was transferred to a psychiatric facility 72 hours later. Her final drawing, scratched violently into her mattress, was of a bell tower submerged in ocean water and a girl standing at the bottom, smiling, waiting, reaching up. By day 6, even the skeptics fell silent. Room 6 had become the hospital's coldest location, despite the central heating system showing no faults. Thermographic scans revealed an abnormal drop in temperature directly beneath the girl's cot, where the floor registered 40 degrees centigrade, while the rest of the room stayed near 68 degrees Celsius. But it wasn't the cold that disturbed the staff. It was the sound. Beneath the floorboards, they began to hear dripping, slow, deliberate, rhythmic, as if water were leaking from somewhere below, even though the hospital had no pipes running under that wing. Then came the knocking. 3 soft taps, always at 3:12 a.m. from beneath the bed. When maintenance attempted to lift the flooring, they found it sealed with iron nails dating back to the 1800s, each inscribed with a name. And one of those names belonged to a nurse who had vanished from the hospital in 1837, her disappearance unsolved. The girl had stopped eating, drinking, blinking, yet somehow she gained weight. Her reflection in the mirror no longer matched her posture. When she turned her head, the reflection remained still, watching the staff, always smiling. Something ancient wasn't just watching, it was feeding. And it was almost done waiting. And then, on the 7th night, the girl spoke. Not with her mouth, but through every radio intercom and medical device in the building all at once. Her voice was layered, distorted, echoing in languages both known and dead. Staff described it as a sound that didn't come from the throat, but from somewhere beneath the earth. What she said shattered their perception of who or what she truly was. I was never a child. I was never born. That was the first full sentence transcribed from the broadcast, though no human throat in the room ever moved. What followed wasn't just a voice. It was an assault on understanding a linguistic cascade that included Sumerian Latin and phonemes not found in any living language. Linguists brought in to analyze the frequencies described the voice as something mimicking human tone, but built from a deeper, older architecture. The hospital's fire alarm system triggered, without smoke releasing a flood of ash, not water from its sprinklers. Ash later confirmed to contain trace remnants of bone salt and sea sand. Meanwhile, the girl in room 6 sat motionless, her lips sealed slate, clean eyes glowing under infrared, as if lit from within. The audio ended with 5 words repeated 9 times each, growing louder, harsher, more layered. The blood remembers the bell. After that, nearly half the staff resigned within 48 hours. The other half simply stopped speaking to each other. Logic had collapsed. Faith was fractured. And beneath it all, one question echoed louder than ever. What exactly had they invited in the security footage from 3:12 a.m. was reviewed exactly once, then permanently sealed by federal order. What it showed wasn't a haunting. It was an impossibility. The girl who had not moved in days suddenly stood upright, but her shadow did not follow. It stretched backward against the light source, twisting and elongating across the ceiling like liquid night. Her eyes rolled back, revealing not whites but etched symbols that matched carvings discovered beneath the hospital's foundation during renovation in 1964. A pattern no one could explain until they overlaid the image with a forgotten map of pre-colonial burial grounds. It fit perfectly. Room 6 sat directly atop a collapsed ceremonial chamber used for sacrifice and silence. From her mouth came not breath but mist, a dense freezing fog that coated the windows with outlines of human hands, some impossibly small, others clawed. The girl's pulse never changed, but every clock in the building stopped for 7 full minutes, even digital ones. Staff described the atmosphere as a rupture in time, as if the hospital had been pulled out of sequence, forced to remember something it had buried for centuries. And then the walls began to sweat salt. 1 week after the girl arrived, the dreams began shared, identical and relentless. Dozens of staff members, from janitors to surgeons, reported visions of a black sea stretching endlessly beneath the hospital, with a bell tower rising from its depths, inverted, its bell rusted, but still swinging in slow, impossible circles. In each dream, the girl stood at the base motionless, her dress soaked, her hand raised not in greeting, but in warning. Medical personnel began sleepwalking, scribbling symbols in blood across tiled walls they didn't remember entering. One technician was found standing barefoot on the roof, whispering, "She's not locked in, we are." Security systems glitched beyond repair. All emergency exits began to seal at 3:13 a.m. sharp, without mechanical cause. A priest brought in to bless the room suffered cardiac arrest mid-prayer. His final words were, "She speaks in my mother's voice." Meanwhile, the girl never moved, yet her fingernails grew 4 inches in 3 days, curling inward as if clawing through time. Rationality shattered. Science had no place here anymore. The staff no longer debated whether this was a possession. They began to wonder if this hospital had ever been clean to begin with. The hospital's blueprints told one story, but the ground beneath room 6 told another. After a sinkhole formed directly under the cot, engineers unearthed a sealed trapdoor made of petrified wood and iron, its hinges fused shut, its surface etched with warnings in Old English and Algonquian dialects. The message repeated 4 times, "Bury what remembers." When the trapdoor was finally pried open, a foul wind surged upward, carrying with it the scent of brine rot and something electric. Beneath lay a spiral staircase descending into a stone chamber, untouched by time, where the walls were lined with jawbones, human, animal, and unidentifiable, each wired together with rusted bell string. In the centre stood a stone slab, freshly wet, though no water dripped. On it was carved the same symbol, now appearing in bruises on the girl's back. She hadn't been taken there, she'd been returned. A nurse who entered the chamber collapsed after 14 seconds later, describing the experience as being seen by something that never forgot it was hungry. MRI scans of the girl revealed no internal organs, only a void filled with echoing hums at 17 Hz, the known frequency of fear. That night, every bell in the city rang once, simultaneously. On the 12th day, her file disappeared, wiped from every system hard drive, and even physical copy, as if she had never been admitted. Security logs showed a janitor long dead, buried in 1983, walking calmly out of room 6 carrying the folder, then vanishing at the edge of the West Wing camera frame. When staff tried to re-document her presence, the ink on the paper would melt into unreadable shapes. Even spoken attempts at transcription were met with sudden nosebleeds and auditory hallucinations of distant bells submerged in water. A neurologist monitoring her EEG flatlined for 6 seconds, not the patient, the doctor, before convulsing and whispering, "She remembers before the flood." That same night, a power outage blackened the entire hospital for 13 minutes. Yet room 6 remained lit, not with electricity, but with a dim, pulsing red glow from beneath the bed. When they lifted the mattress, there was nothing beneath it, just floorboards wet, warped, and whispering. Yes, whispering. Recorded audio confirmed dozens of voices layered into a single phrase. She is not the first. She is the echo. From that moment, nothing in the hospital felt built by human hands anymore. Reality had rewired itself. And then, silence. Not the kind born from peace, but the kind that follows something ancient waking up, then deciding to wait. After the 12th night, room 6 was found empty. No girl. No bed. Just a single burned handprint on the wall upside down, still warm. But what happened next wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of what followed them all. Weeks after the incident, staff from the hospital began reporting the same recurring dream. A girl with no face standing at the foot of their bed, whispering backwards. Some woke with their sheets twisted into nooses. Others found small bruises in the exact shape of the hospital's bell insignia on their chests, as if something had marked them. Surveillance footage from the West Wing, now permanently sealed, showed shadow figures moving independently of any known light source. A nurse who attempted to enter room 6 collapsed mid-step. Her final words caught on body cam. "It's not gone. It's just hungry again." The hospital tried to rebrand, but no one could keep the name from fading off the signage, literally peeling like burned skin within days. And in nearby neighborhoods, children began humming an unfamiliar lullaby in unison, one they claimed they'd learned from the red-haired girl in the alley. But no such girl had been seen, not alive, not recently. It became clear to everyone who'd come near room 6 what escaped that bed wasn't a girl. It was a memory older than memory, and now it lived in them. 3 months later, the attending physician was found in his apartment, walls covered in hand-drawn maps of the hospital, except every floor plan twisted into a spiral, converging into a single black dot labelled "Only Her." He had pulled out all the nails from his floorboards, carefully spelling a sentence across the room: "She sings in the drains." Emergency crews reported a sulphurous smell and a soft lullaby echoing from beneath the bathtub. None of them had turned on the water. A police officer assigned to the case later quit without explanation. But before leaving, he submitted one final report, a grainy photo of room 6, lights flickering and a blurred figure crawling on the ceiling with no eyes and too many elbows. It wasn't the girl. Or at least not just her. The figure's body wore the torn remains of every uniform once worn by missing staff. Something had been collecting them, copying them, becoming them. Local legends began to morph. The girl was no longer a patient. She was the recall, the relapse of something never cured, an echo that keeps returning when forgotten. And forgetting it, they learned, was exactly how it spreads. 6 former staff members, now scattered across different states, began experiencing identical auditory hallucinations at precisely 3:17 a.m., the exact time the girl was first declared dead. Each described hearing a child's voice humming in reverse, followed by a wet gasp and the sound of scratching inside their walls. One tried soundproofing his entire home, but when the humming stopped, he claimed the silence felt too loud, like the absence of a pulse. Another fled to Alaska, only to wake up one night and find his cabin's windows fogged from the inside fingerprints, forming a perfect spiral from a child's hand. None of them had children. Surveillance footage later showed their doorway stretching inwards for a fraction of a second, like the architecture itself was breathing, and in every location one thing remained constant. Room 6 was scrawled somewhere on mirrors, beneath paint, scratched into wood, even stitched inside clothing tags. It was as if the room was no longer part of a building, but had become a virus, an architectural parasite, embedding itself into memory space and skin. Something you can't just leave, because the door was never locked. It just needed you to forget it was open. In the years following the incident, property records for the building mysteriously vanished from city archives as if it had never legally existed. But even more disturbing was what's resurfaced hand-drawn floor plans of a room configuration that didn't match any known blueprint, all marked in charcoal, and something that tested positive for trace elements of bone dust. Urban explorers who broke into the sealed site reported hearing their own names whispered from behind the walls. But when they returned home, several found that their phone's voice memos had recorded full hours of static interrupted only by the phrase, "She never left." One man burned every copy of the footage he had, only to wake up with his hands blackened by ash and nails in his pillowcase arranged like teeth. What haunted them wasn't just the memory, it was a resonance, a residue of something sentient that mimicked their thoughts, echoed their regrets, and rewrote their guilt. Those who dared to document it suffered psychotic breaks or disappeared completely, but their final messages shared the same phrase. It doesn't haunt the building anymore. It follows voices. And once you've heard about Room 6, it knows your name too. To this day, no one has successfully documented Room 6 without consequences. A professor from Michigan tried compiling survivor testimonies into a documentary, but he vanished before the premiere, leaving behind footage that glitched every time someone uttered the room's number. Theatres that screened it reported technical failures, seizures among viewers, and one case of mass disorientation where the audience collectively forgot the exit route. Conspiracy forums refer to the phenomenon as architectural echo syndrome, but linguists studying the tapes have detected something more disturbing, a second inverted language layered beneath human speech, responding in real time. Those who've tried to decode it speak of an entity that learns through attention, grows through fear, and travels through the telling. That's why those who truly understand the story never say the name aloud. They call it the room that remembers you. And if you've listened this far, if your curiosity kept you tethered to every word, you've already stepped inside it. Because Room 6 isn't a place anymore. It's a pattern. And now it's part of you. If this story left your pulse racing, your mind questioning reality, and your screen feeling just a little too reflective, then know this, you're not alone. These tales don't just entertain, they crawl under your skin, demanding to be remembered. But the only way to truly process what you've just heard is to speak it. So tell us, what would you have done if you were the one standing outside room 6? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit save so you can come back when the chills return. And if you crave more unsettling truths wrapped in silence and shadow, subscribe now, because the next door we open might be one you've already passed in real life.